a long bio, but I don't think this is Wendy's bio. I think it's a highlight of a few things, but I think Wendy's done much more than this because I know how much she does, right? So let me read this quickly before she joins us up here at the podium. Wendy joined Unity in 1984 and received her licensed Unity teacher status in 2000. She has been a facilitator of Unity's courses for over 25 years, and she specializes in Bible understanding and metaphysical interpretation. In 2026, she will serve as adjunct faculty at Unity Worldwide Spiritual Institute when she's not facilitating courses locally. When not exploring the Bible, she loves to explore Unity history, especially its development, growth, and growth here in Canada. And she says she is grateful for our invitation, but we're mostly grateful to have you here. So Wendy, come on up, fill in any more blanks too, because I know there's a lot more that you do. We're using the mouse, but feel free to use the arrow button if you like to.
Terrific. Oh, thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm going to stop sharing just for a moment so I can see faces and I can see who's here. And wow, look at all these faces and faces I know and faces I haven't seen in a while. And I'm thrilled to be here today. So Cheryl is actually speaking at Unity Halton Peel, which is my home ministry. So back in the day, when Rev Sharon was here and Reverend Jane was at Hamilton and Reverend Pat was at, as we were then Mississauga, we do like a pulpit switch. Everybody would like switch one city and then they'd switch another city. So Cheryl and I have sort of taken a place back to that and done that switcheroo. So just a second here. Got to remember how to do all this because I teach on a different platform than Zoom, and
Yeah, you're okay actually.
And I need to remind myself how to do. Where am I here?
You just put the PowerPoint.
Share. There we go. Yeah, you go. Had to find the share button. All right. So usually my talks are about a spiritual principle, or I'm giving you a sense of some history or something. And I'm feeling a little uncomfortable about this talk because it's me. I'm giving you my history with Unity Kitchener. But that kind of felt appropriate because you guys are 50 years old. Like, yay! Not all Unity ministries in Canada made it to that. So we're going to go back before I got on the scene. So I had this picture in my collection and I thought, oh, well, we need to show that. Now, I'm still not really clear about who Reverend Margaret Kahn was. I've seen pictures of her down at Unity Village talking with Lowell Fillmore, the #1 son of our co-founders. The two important people, I didn't want to cut Marg out, like that's rude. But Reverends John and Joe Harris. Now, John, I didn't have a lot of contact with, but Joe, I gotta tell you about Joe. And I got to also acknowledge the Sinsteads and other ministers who have guided you through your passage as Unity Kitchener, and movements in changes in name and changes in location, changes at time of service, and all sorts of things. So I started my Unity journey at what was then called Christ Church Unity Center, which is now Unity Spiritual Center of Hamilton. And you folks were known as Unity Center of Practical Christianity. And actually, even in the later days around COVID, my GPS was still saying Unity Center for Practical Christianity. And I was kind of laughing because I thought, if you don't know that that is Unity Kitchener, you might not realize that you are being directed where you need to go. So that's just a little, those of you who know me know I'm a historian, so lots of rabbit holes today. But my very, very first Unity workshop was with Reverend Joe Harris, and it was on meditation and relaxation. And I still use some of the techniques that she taught me back in the day because they were so useful. They were simple, they were easy to understand, and she started by telling us how she used to walk like this, at a 45-degree angle in great speed, and how using these techniques had calmed her down enough that she could walk upright and be in balance with her body. And I grew up in a church where we didn't talk about stuff like that. We didn't talk about that your body was a temple and that there was an importance of the spiritual practice of taking care of your body. Some of you who've been around a while remember the artwork. I believe at one point the wording was replaced with a mirror. Someone can correct me on that.
Sure.
But when I first started coming up to Kitchener for concerts, for workshops, to hear a guest speaker that otherwise I wouldn't get to hear, that was on the wall, and we would often sing. That was often our opening song, was Surely the Presence is in this place. It's very sacred to me because that was one of the songs we sang as we were going through to become licensed Unity teachers, and it was one of our centering songs. So I started in Hamilton, and then I moved to Windsor. And in Windsor, I met Reverend Lila Hancock, who became my mentor as I went through the LUT process. And she had fallen in love and was going to get married, and Joe Harris performed the wedding. And just a sidebar, that's my late husband handing the bride off. She had asked us, I was a bridesmaid, he was the honorary father of the bride. So we were, kind of engaged up here. Like, I remember Lila and I driving up from Windsor to Kitchener, trying to find where are they going to stay, where are we going to have the reception, all of those things. And it was kind of interesting to me that now my connection to Windsor also included my connection with Kitchener. It was all, talk about the oneness in expression. Reverend Lila passed away in 2000, and I just, every so often I think of her and give thanks as my mentor and one of the people who taught me. Some of you may recognize a few faces in here. I certainly do. One, of course, is Reverend Shan Ketchum, who was the minister here for a number of years. I've forgotten how many years. Did you know that she actually started at Unity of Mississauga, which is my current home ministry? So Sharon and I knew each other before she became a minister. And every so often I forget to say the Rev part in front of it, We always laughed, though, once she came to Kitchener, that the only time we got to see each other was when we were at Unity Village for convention. That somehow that distance between Mississauga and Kitchener, along the 401 no less, was just, it just didn't work. So we used to joke about that we had that whole thing. Now, those of you who know me well know that I love frogs. Well, guess who aided and abetted that? And shout out to Nancy Cherry for my first Rely on God artwork. I'm so appreciative she made that for me. You may recall at Kingsway there was a fountain, and there were frogs all over the place. And I always appreciated different times. I can think of 3 off the top of my head, where Sharon and I were at a convention or a conference or something, and they were giving out frogs. And I remember one in particular where she came up to me after the initial keynote. She said, "Did you get a frog?" And I said, "No, I didn't." And they ran out. She said, "No, they didn't. I took one for you because I was sitting up at the front and I figured they'd run out, so I made sure you got one." So that little frog is still in my collection. But that was part of my relationship here, that, I might not have been engaged with the congregation, but certainly Sharon and I were, we were always sharing frog jokes and, oh, hey, I had this great story for Sunday, you could have at it, and things like that. In 2001, you can see here on the slide, 5 New Thought groups got together. We just made it through the Y2K panic. And so you have Christ Church Unity Center, now Hamilton. You have Unity Center of Practical Christianity in Kitchener. You have the Deborah Coleman Ministries. Deborah started at Hamilton and then decided to follow her own path, and she had her own ministries. I believe they were situated in Burlington. And then Unity Church of Mississauga, and then the Religious Science Center of Toronto. And we did some activities together. My shirt, the reason that looks kind of funny is because I sent some t-shirts to a friend of mine and said, could you make me a memory quilt? So it's now in a quilt rather than something that I can wear. So in 2002, talk about spirals and things. Unity headquarters decided that Canada needed to be its own region. We already were, for purposes of administration, we were the Association of Unity Churches Canada. And so we had our own numbers with CRA, and we had our own experience with, you know, the whole Canadian laws and legislation governing churches and charitable organizations. But they decided in 2002 that it would be really good if Canada became its own region, even though we already were, in a way. And then we would have our own national school. I don't think they understand at headquarters how big Canada is and how much untamed land there still is in Canada. So this would be the same as what they have in the UK, in the Australasian Pacific area, Nigeria, some other places around the world. And so somehow, I don't know how, because I was fresh out of school, it was decided that I would become the first director of Unity School Canada. And Kitchener would be its home address and its home site. And so I would meet regularly with Reverend Jane and Reverend Sharon, and we would meet at what we call Holy Tim's. Holy Tim's is the Tim Hortons where number 6 and the 401 intersect. Very convenient for all three of us. So if you go in there, just pause and see if you can still feel the energy of all those meetings we held. I've still used that as a meeting point for friends from this area. So one of the things we did was as with the ministers trading pulpits, we swapped, and we would meet, we might have a week long at Hamilton, because at that point they still had a retreat center. But then we decided that week longs really were too intensive. And we decided and created with blessings of headquarters these Super Saturdays. So when you see something about a Super Saturdays, that's a Canadian invention. So we would have 6 weeks. Saturdays we'd have as many as 4 classes, and we would rotate between Hamilton, Kitchener, and Mississauga. And we'd have people come down from Newmarket, up from Windsor and London, and sometimes we'd even have people cross the border from Buffalo. And we would teach these classes in the field, and quite a few of the ministers and LUTs are graduates of that time when we were doing that. And I just want to point out, on the right here is Reverend Kerry. She was one of our instructors as well. So that's at Hamilton if you had never been to the old place. But it was really interesting to try and bring that group together. So no surprise, I believe Sharon made this up, so because there's a frog. We named our mascot Jeremiah Gorf. And yes, it is inspired by the song. You know, Jeremiah was a little frog. Jeremiah still lives at my house and shows up for classes from time to time. So that has been consistent. And to this day, Kitchener is still one of the administrative parts of our teaching in Canada. I can't remember what year it was that Bill was approached. He was also an LUT. He was a pastoral. I'm an adult ed instructor. But there was a study group in Guelph. And I came in later. This is Ellen Walker. Some of you elder berries might recognize her. She was also an LUT. So the three of us ended up sharing the leadership. I came in later because there was another building that they were at, and I came in just after that. It was an interesting experience, not the least of which is the difference in snow between Burlington and Kitchener can be considerable on a Sunday. And all of that said, I do look back on those days with great fondness, and I'm grateful to Reverend Sharon if she ever sees this. because I was able to figure out that I was not cut out to be a spiritual leader before I went through the process of the hoops to go into admissions and go through the classes and spend the money and the time and the effort to become a minister. I was very clear by the end of my time with Unity of Guelph that my calling was to teach. And that's what I've been doing. In 2017, I resigned my job with the Ministry of the Attorney General at the Brampton Courthouse. That was part of the reason I was having trouble with Unity of Guelph, was because working in a courthouse, if you have, it can be exhausting. And just trying to be a spiritual leader on top of that was just too much. But in 2017, I resigned, and opportunities suddenly popped into my lap, including here at Kitchener. Some talks I gave, The Truth About Giving. I think that might have been the first one I gave. And actually, the first one I gave in a long time. I had spoken before I was licensed while you folks were between Joe Harris and Reverend Sharon. And I've forgotten the interim minister's name, but she was on vacation, and I filled in for her. And that was like the first time I'd spoken to that big of a group in that big of a setting. So that's probably 90, I want to say 97 or 98, somewhere in there. So I was given this opportunity, and not only was I given the opportunity to speak, but I was given the opportunity to lead a discussion group on the metaphysical story of Christmas in 2018. And 2018, my husband had sort of looked at me and said, don't bother looking for a new job. You're clearly loving this teaching stuff, and I will find ways to make sure that we can, keep the house and keep food and cars and stuff, and you can teach. And we were testing the waters of teaching. And I said to Rev Sharon, how do you feel if I come up to Kitchener, because it's kind of halfway between Hamilton and Mississauga, or between Hamilton, Mississauga, and London. It's kind of an easy point for folks, and I'll teach here. She said, sure. I said, do you mind if I teach in the afternoon and then in the evening? She said, sounds great. So we decided we'd have the class up in the boardroom, and we wheeled in the big TV. And for the first time ever, I connected to Zoom. So we were teaching on Zoom in 2018. 2019, we made it kind of official, and we announced that Unity Canada would sponsor classes taught on Zoom. And then I stopped driving up to Kingsway because I could just do it from home. So why not sit in my comfortable chair at home rather than fighting the traffic on the 401? And if you know, you know. So what headquarters had wanted us to create in 2002 was finally manifesting. Only because what they had wanted, where Canada had like a central hub where we could teach Unity classes, we had it through Zoom 17 years later. But you know what that also did was that gave me the opportunity to say to my home ministry, hey, how would you feel if on Wednesday afternoons I took over the sanctuary and we did a hybrid of the Lenten booklet and the Advent booklet? And then we started having people coming from coast to coast. I love that our classes are often from sea to shining sea, from New Brunswick to Vancouver Island and points in between. What was interesting to me was that we were so ready when COVID hit in terms of the education. We were actually in the midst of doing a Lenten series. We weren't using Zoom. Headquarters had actually asked us to test out some software they were thinking of investing in. So we just kept, the only difference was nobody showed up at the church. We all dialed in from our homes. So my husband passed in October of 2019. And to say it was hard to go back to the Mississauga building is an understatement. If he hadn't been a musician, I think it would have been easier. But he had been a musician, and there was that empty space up at the front where he had formerly stood with his bass guitar. So my first Sunday lesson without him was here. And I am so grateful because I didn't know if I was going to make it through. I chose a talk on the Psalm 23. It was Bill's favorite, which probably wasn't my best choice, but it felt right, so I went with it. And when I was clearing out his office, anybody in the room or online remember this?
Yeah, it was
Yeah, the magnet.
Yeah.
I don't know how he got one and I didn't, but that's okay. I got his now, so it's all right. But I just thought, wow, this is wonderful stuff. So 2020 Lent. The booklet that year was a question and response kind of thing. And I have really enjoyed doing the Lenten and Advent booklets because I learned, and after 40 plus years in Unity, sometimes you forget what you learned because it's just kind of in your bone marrow. So my first lesson before we went into lockdown was at Mississauga. And I remember changing my talk and telling because Reverend Mary was away. And I remember saying, Rev Mary, I changed my talk at 2 o'clock this morning. Sorry, I'm not talking about what I told you I was going to talk about, because they had announced that we were going to go into lockdown the following Wednesday. Remember those days? Feels like forever ago. And I was booked here at Kitchener. So I drove up to Kingsway. I donned my mask. Marg had her mask on. Cheryl had her mask on. And we tried to master live stream on the fly. And I'm hoping that when Cheryl gets to see this and when Marg gets to see this, that they have a good laugh, because we did it eventually, but not in the time frame that we had hoped for. We ended up having to tell people, first it was stand by, we're working on it, and then it was stand by and watch for the recording to be released on YouTube, because we just can't do the live stream. Sorry, folks. So my talk became Pandemic Fears Meet My Prayers, and I changed from talking about the booklet, which was supposed to be the first of a 2-part series, to a lesson on prayer and Unity's affirmative prayer. So I came back virtually via Zoom and kind of squished the 2 talks together. But I've always loved this. Headquarters sent this out as something you could use, and there was a prayer that went with it. But I love this artwork because we can still use it today. It's not specific to COVID. I'm just going to invite everyone just to take a moment, breathe, and look at this. And let my words be your words as I read. We bless our global family with radiant health, peace of mind, and abundant love. So Kitchener was the first time I got to be on a pixel board. Oh my goodness, I was so excited. I'd never been on a pixel board before. I mean, I thought it was exciting when I saw my name on the website, but a pixel board on Highway 8 where people are driving by. Wow. The only other pixel board I've ever been on, surprise, surprise, Reverend Sharon's in Lansing when I spoke there a few years ago. I am also so grateful to have been invited to join the spirit groups and have now led What's So Good About the Good book 11 times. This is our 11th time through. And I love the discussion. I love the friendships I'm making. And that's been underpinned by Unity of Kitchener. So again, I'm still linked in. And then, of course, who can forget our party? And I loved photobombing you folks. That was kind of sneaky and fun, but I don't know if you had seen that. So I just want to say how grateful I am that you have loved me, that you have created space for me to learn, to grow, to express myself. And I'm so grateful to be here today. And let us now get comfortable as we have a short meditation. And it's based on this quote from Eric Butterworth. Life is a flowing experience, and the only certainty is change. And as we move into that place within ourself that is the Holy of Holies, the center of the oneness, our true self, I'm just going to invite you to bring to mind some people. First of all, those who have gone before in both ministries and in Unity Canada. We bless and appreciate the gifts and experience that they brought to our communities, brought to ourselves. And second, I'm going to invite you to bless everyone who is holding the vision today, including yourself. And thirdly, let us bless those who are not yet here, who have not yet arrived, who have not yet felt the divine nudge to come to a unity center. We know we have a good message. We know that there are people who would benefit from it. And we send from our hearts, like the bat signal, here we are. Come join us. And we appreciate the buildings which have housed our ministries across Canada and throughout the world. But even though it was difficult when the time came to let them go to another use, we know that the next best place is waiting. Perhaps it's currently occupied, and that's why it's not jumping up saying, pick me, pick me. But we know and affirm that this too shall manifest in right and perfect time. And finally, I invite you to bring into this common space the vision going forward. What are your dreams for your community? What would you like to see next year, 3 years, 5 years? And for all that has gone before, for all that is, and for all that is yet to be, we are so grateful. And so it is, and so it shall be. Thank you again for having me.